part 3, we're going to talk more about deception. So as I'm talking about deception by omission in the second video, I'm sure the first word that came to your mind was lying, right? That's the term that we so frequently use in our language that talks about people that purposefully keep information back from us or tell us something that is not true. So let's talk about deception by commission, which we call lying. And there's 3 different types of lying that happens in the dark side of relationships. The first one is white lies. These are slight fabrications about the actual truth. These are like we use the term little white lies probably a lot in our daily language or in our just kind of everyday conversation, but that's what that is. That is slight degrees of fabrication. Exaggeration is the idea that you're stretching the truth, that you are embellishing a little bit, that you are making more of something that really wasn't, or you're making less of something that really was, those types of things. And then there are what the book calls bold-faced lies, which is just outright falsifications of what happened, of what was said, of the way events went down, whatever it may be. It's just flat out bold-faced lies. Those are all considered deception by commission. So you are saying something, but they are either fabrications, stretching of the truth, or just outright false information. Ways in which we deal with that is that we have deception by omission, right? Then we have deception by commission, by lying. So deception is a dark side of a relationship because we have the expectation to some varying degree that people won't be deceitful to us, that they won't try to deceive us in some way. And when it happens, we then start to question the foundation of relationships. We start to question why people are trying to deceive us and why there is some level of deception in our relationships. And if you think back to video 2, when we talked about interpersonal deception theory, in relationships, we are trying to understand and manage the emotion that comes behind this deception. So when there's some sort of goal of manipulation in mind, we are trying to understand what the goal of the lying is. What is this person trying to achieve by either omitting information in a relationship or intentionally lying about information? What is the end goal for this? And sometimes that can be resolved through conversation. Sometimes that can be resolved through forgiveness. Rarely ever is it resolved through some sort of retaliation. But deception is probably the number one kind of quote unquote dark side of relationships. When we talk about ways in which we manage when we feel like we are being deceived, we call this the balance of communication and feelings in a relationship. And there's 3 different ways in which we react when we know that we've been lied to, or when somebody is trying to deceive us, or when we realize that expectations have been failed to be met. 3 different ways. In front of you, you can see they are active responses. These are reactive statements that are made in response to any sort of hurtful information that we receive. So these are statements we say back to people in response to hurtful messages. When we do some sort of acquiescent type of response, these are things like apologizing profusely or crying or some sort of conceding to any sort of hurtful responses that we get. That is the second one. And then invulnerable responses is the third one. And those are things like kind of laughing off somebody's feelings, ignoring the fact that there's some sort of transgression in an interpersonal relationship, or being silent in response to somebody telling you that you've hurt their feelings. So just no reaction at all. No sort of compassion or reaction, sympathy or empathy, nothing at all. Those are the invulnerable responses that happen. In relationships, another sort of dark side to relationships is the idea of jealousy. These are things that we have in a relationship that are not healthy things. They are not things that contribute to building a relationship. Jealousy is one of the dark side things that will contribute to breaking down in a relationship. And we hear the term jealousy, and some people think that they define jealousy as just kind of wanting what somebody else has. But actually, that's not what jealousy is. So let's talk about a couple different definitions that the book goes over to kind of break down what we're actually feeling when we feel this sort of ping of jealousy towards somebody else in a relationship. So the first one is envy. And envy is the idea that we have discontent from a desire for something that somebody else has. So somebody else has this amazing car. Envy is actually the feeling of discontent that you will have because you don't have this amazing car. That's not being jealous. That's being envious of something that someone else has. So it's this feeling of discontent that you own from not having this car that somebody else has. Okay. Jealousy is actually the reaction that you have to the threat of losing something in a valued relationship. So the reaction to the threat of losing something is actually what jealousy is. It is the internalization of a feeling that you are about to lose either a good friend that you have, or you lose some sort of very marked emotion that you have with somebody, an emotional connection. Maybe a level of self-disclosure starts to rise, so you don't have as deep of a level of self-disclosure. That is actually what jealousy is, which is a reaction that we have to a threat in a relationship. Envy is this idea of desiring something somebody else has. Jealousy is a reaction to a threat. So I hope you understand the difference there. Two very different things. I think often we interchange them and we don't understand the difference of them. You just use the term jealousy as this blanket feeling that we have, but they're actually two very separate ideas. Cognitive jealousy is the thought about loss. So it's the reflections on things that are going to go away because your relationship is the threat of losing a valued relationship. So let's say, for example, you have a dear friend that starts to spend more time with somebody else. Things that you might have done with this person, they're now doing with somebody else. That reaction to that loss, that reflection that is something that I would have done with that person, is actually cognitive jealousy. That is the analysis in your own mind that this seems weird. Like, why are they spending more time with that person and not me? I wish I was the person they were spending more time with. That's that reflection that you're having in your mind is cognitive jealousy. Emotional jealousy is the actual feelings that get raised when those things happen. So those actual feelings you can put labels on, like hurt and anger and distrust and worry or concern or anything like that, that is all the emotional jealousy that comes with it. So cognitive are the thoughts that you have, but emotional jealousy are those actual feelings that you can put labels on: anger, concern, hurt, those types of things. The last one is behavioral jealousy. And that is the actions that we take to alter the jealousy invoking thing that happened. So this is a retaliatory action that somebody has when they feel like they are being hurt or they're losing a relationship in some way. They will do something that alters the upper hand, that gives them more power. So you have somebody, going with the same example, unless you have a close friend from years ago that one of your best friends you spend lots of time with, they're now spending more time with somebody else. You do something to invoke jealousy on their end. So let's say you notice that they're doing that a lot and there's something that you always did together. Let's say you always went Christmas shopping together the second Saturday of December. Just getting random example for you. But throughout the fall, you've noticed that they're spending more time with this other person and you're kind of feeling these feelings of loneliness, and you're it's very confusing because there's a loss of time spent and things seem suspicious, right? So there's all this cognitive and emotional jealousy happening. So then you decide second week or second Saturday in December, you're going to invite somebody else along to your shopping adventure you've always had. That is taking the step and an action in behavioral jealousy to flip the upper hand. So you're going to alter and make them feel jealous, make them feel hurt, make them feel like they're worried about your relationship and the threat of losing a relationship. That is behavioral jealousy, actually taking the action to do that. So how is this harmful in a relationship? We talked about a couple of weeks ago, we talked about bad things that happen in a relationship and how it actually is extremely hurtful in a relationship. And we talk about this in 4 different ways. We talk about unwanted attention. We talk about obsessive relational intrusion. We talk about stalking. And then we talk about relational violence. So in the different areas of this, unwanted attention are those things that we don't necessarily like the attention. We don't necessarily think that we deserve the attention. It makes us feel uncomfortable, but it doesn't really hurt us or violate us or take away any sort of time or emotional energy. It's just something that you're not interested in getting. Maybe somebody says something to you that is just unwanted, unwarranted, not appropriate, but it's not hurtful to you in any way. The second one is obsessive relational intrusion, and that is when it becomes repeated. It's when they are asking inappropriate questions, when they are saying things that make you uncomfortable, they are saying things that are out of line, when it's happening over and over and over and over again, even after you have told them it makes you uncomfortable. After you told them that is an intrusion of your privacy, it still happens. That's when it becomes obsessive. The third one, stalking, is when it becomes an absolute obsession. It is them showing up, them secretly watching you, them arriving places they shouldn't be, knowing your schedule before you know your schedule, asking to spend time with other people that you know to get information about you. The book even talks about taking things that don't belong to them that belong to you, like articles of clothing or things that you've touched. That becomes a whole nother level. That becomes a actual mental disorder where somebody is stalking you. And then the fourth one is relational violence. And that is when somebody is so controlling over the relationship that they become incredibly violent with you. And the book actually does a nice job of saying that relational violence can be emotional and verbally abusive as well as physically abusive. So some people think relational violence and they automatically go to physically abusive, but it can actually be relational violence can be emotional and mental abuse as well, and physical. So it can include all of those things. So I always use an example of somebody that I used to work with that went through all 4 of these stages. And as I talked about them, you probably noticed that I kind of the depth and breadth of what was happening in the harmful relationships got larger and deeper. And that's the idea here, is that it will start sometimes as unwanted attention, and then it becomes obsessive, and then it becomes stalking, and then it becomes relational violence. And so I had somebody that I knew, a coworker that I knew, where it started as unwanted attention. It became these things that were being said and they were uncomfortable. And she would share it with us and we would be like, that's really unfortunate, but you should probably set boundaries and it would happen again. And then it would become intrusive. Then it would become obsessive. And then it would become almost disgusting in a way. And then it became stalking. It became showing up at dinners where she went to dinner with her friends. It became showing up at her house at all hours of the night. And then it became violent. And the thing that ends up getting her in the most trouble is when he threw her down a set of stairs. So that was a 1,000% relational violence. So it started, and I remember I could walk through the different conversations we had where it was unwanted attention, and then it became obsessive, and then it was actual stalking where police had to get involved and reports had to be written, and then it got very violent. So the idea here is that it can start as something that just seems unwanted, but it will become something more and something very hurtful to people.